get started telling tough stories, we'd be here all night. I'll slip in one short one. Give you an idea of what Zora did to the language. He used to say, see, his office was right next to mine, Hauserman partitions with glass and so on. But he'd come around, he'd say, Bob, that's as close as he ever got. Bob, he says, I buy coffee if you buy. That means, when you translate this into English, this means that he had the money if I'd go after it. I buy coffee if you buy it. Well, back to fuel injection on the Corvair. We had gotten the turbocharger fairly well along. This was something that had started with, essentially with TRW in Cleveland. And their turbocharger division had been working on diesel stuff for years. They were pretty well with it. And we were fairly pleased with the thing. I guess one of the kicks I got was getting old magazine writers. Brock Yates comes to mind. The sales department would get these guys in and say, hey, we got something, go out to engineering. And, well, I don't know if you can imagine, maybe you can, of getting somebody who was in the business, roughly familiar with the Corvair, and take them out on test track, which is right across the tracks from us in the tech center. Get them in the Corvair and say, go. Well, as they got up in speed, the absolute utter astonishment, the total disbelief as to what this thing was doing. As those of you who drive it or have driven it, you get a real boot in the seat of the pants from this thing. And without too much introduction, it was a kind of funny to watch the reactions from these guys. That test track. That reminds me of another Duntoff story.
But you forget the other two.
This was much later on after I'd taken over all of Chevrolet's engines. And my staff engineer, who had the high performance stuff, which included the Corvette engines, Bill Pokinghorn was his name. Bill and Zora went out one day to ride check something on this track and across the way. And what it was is a mile straightaway with a hairpin on each end. In between was two-way traffic. And with a driving on the right, there was a left turn on each end. Well, they'd gone out to ride check this thing for some reason or other. And I noticed they were back in the office, in Zora's office, and Bill was there trying to hold a cup of coffee. He just couldn't make it. Well, I knew something would happen. So I went around the corner and I got the story. What had happened on the north hairpin, Zora had lost it and wiped out along the guardrail the whole way around this turn. And Bill's riding shotgun and watching the car disappear from the whole right side of the car. About this time, Denny Davis, who worked for Zora, stuck his head in the door, and Zora says, Danny, that's as close as he ever got to Denny, says, Danny, he says, door handle fall off Corvette, you fix. So Denny went out to the garage and dutifully wrote up the repair ticket for this door handle. But at least he had the wit to look at the car before he turned it in. Of course, he was horrified. The whole right side of the car was gone. Anyway, we were on one road test trip through, it come from Pikes Peak and we're heading south here, and we came down through Oak Creek Canyon, which is just south of here. Unfortunately, you're not able to get in there this year. I understand that for the fire hazard, the whole thing has been closed. But the north end of that road is a bunch of switchbacks, hairpin turns, 10, 5 mile, 15 mile an hour turns that drop you from up on the Navajo Plateau where you are now down into the canyon. That's a drop, I think, of around 2,000 feet. Well, this one, Rosie again. Rosie and the chief engineer from Rochester with an A system, fuel injection system in it, were leading. And Rosie was known to be a pretty wild driver. Most of these old timers with, you know, car sense, if you will, just not technical geniuses, but learned basic car sense. Rosie come up as a transmission guy, and they tell stories about Rosie when he was trying to match a transmission, even though it was a well-known transmission, match it, I'm talking automatics now, to a new application. Of course, you got to start over. The shift points are all brand new. You got to change all the valving, the springs, etc. And they tell about stories about Rosie going through the stock room, not the drafting room to design another spring, but he's going through the stock rooms, you know, this kind of stuff, this one, until he finally finds the one that he wants that feels about right. Well, I guess this is basic sense, if you want to call it that. Anyway, coming down Oak Creek Canyon, here's Rosie and the chief engineer from Rochester. And I was scared to death we were going to get stuck with that damn fuel injection system. I was riding second with a turbocharger. There were about 5, 6 cars in the caravan altogether. And I said I was going to stick to Rosie's bumper like glue, no matter what. And I kind of wondered if either one of us were going to survive that thing. That was the wildest ride I ever had. But I stuck with him all the way down and then through Oak Creek Canyon, which is another crooked road. Good thing there weren't any cops around. We've both been in jail to this day. The rest of the guys were, you know, way back and out of sight. And we were downtown in Sedona having coffee when the rest of these guys finally caught up. But I swore, you know, the turbo was not going to be outdone that day. Belts are a problem. I don't suppose any of you ever noticed that. We went through belts and belt vendors. We had one test that worked out fairly well. Didn't need a dynamometer. We had just an engine sitting on a pallet, running out of a can of fuel, and one of the dynamometer operators, I have a name of Gene and I can't remember his last name, he had a real eye for when belts were about to roll over and flip off. He only had one eye, but I tell you, that other eye was really a belt eye. But Gene could go along there with a rod on the throttle and run this thing up and down just to the edge of flipping off. And I think it was guys from Dayton who brought in a belt design that they were particularly proud of. So proud of that they brought the division manager and the sales manager and the chief engineer, as well as the guy who called on us, to witness this thing. So we all trooped out to the laboratory. And Gene set up one of these belts. Of course, he tensioned the belt and then run it in to get everything, you know, kind of seated into the pulleys, and then retension the thing, and then start out again with the throttle. And Gene had run it up right to the edge. And these guys are all smiles. And Gene looked at me and said, "Now, Bob, And I looked at these guys and said, "Are you ready?" And just like that, it was off. Now, I suspect some of you realize that the real enemy of that belt is the torsional or the rotational inertia of the fan. At steady speed, the thing does fine. It's you people, you know, move, instead of moving your foot this way on the clutch, you move it this way. And that's asking that poor blower to change speed in an awful hurry. And in many cases, it's more than the belt can take. Drive A. The original belt, the original blower, as most of you remember, was a pretty heavy piece of steel stampings. And it did a hell of a fine job of moving air. But its inertia was something dreadful against the belt. And we looked for alternatives to this. One of the things that turned up was a acetal plastic from DuPont called Delrin. And this was so new that it really wasn't in other than pilot production at the time. It was still on a research pilot program sort of thing. So we worked with research guys from DuPont. We had the thing actually released for production. It looked that good. And it was a very light blower, did the job, moved the air. We put one of them, among other places, on the car that was a guy from TRW. And driving back from Detroit to Cleveland on a Friday night, he gets to the toll booth, getting on the Ohio Turnpike, and blasting away from that thing, he gets this terrible, overpowering, eye-watering smell in the car. Well, he's on the phone immediately, even though it's Friday night, he's on the phone immediately. So I get with DuPont. Well, what he had must have been formaldehyde. If you've ever smelled formaldehyde, it's not something you forget rather rapidly. And Delrin is a plastic, is polymerized from formaldehyde. So we knew what it was, but we didn't know why. And every reason, there was no reason why this should be, should I say, reverting or breaking up back to formaldehyde. So nothing worked. We finally, I guess it was my dumb idea, we decided we'd take 4 cars, all set up identical to what this turbocharger was for the guy from Cleveland. And in each car we'd have one of my guys and a guy from DuPont's research. And on a Friday night, timed just the way this was, we'd take the trip from Detroit down through Toledo and onto the Turnpike and down to Cleveland with 2-way radios. And I wish we'd preserved those conversations. Smell anything yet? What's it doing now? The theories we had, we thought going through Toledo, there are a bunch of chemical plants in Toledo. Maybe it was some air pollution there that got after, this was one thing we knew would tear up Delrin was sulfuric acid. And maybe there was some sulfurous or sulfuric acid in the air through Toledo. Well, not that Friday night. Nothing at the toll booth. Partway down on the Ohio Turnpike, we pulled in where he'd stopped for coffee and talked this all over. What was the problem? Nothing. Well, finally, what we found on his car was this was in winter, in cold weather, with the recirculation system to keep the, the louvers in the top of the exhaust ducts that recirculated and kept the engine warm. So the battery was pretty hot, and this together with an over high limit charging rate on the generator had made this battery without microscopic. They were, so small, the pits in the floor were so small they had to be found with a microscope. But it doesn't take much to make a big stink. Well, we of course immediately pulled back on the production release of this thing. I was losing sleep for, I think, a year on what might have happened if we'd had a couple of hundred of those things out in the field before the first couple of them started coming back with a big stink. Imagine the disaster we'd have on our hands. Anyway, we took essentially the same design, or very close to it, and had it done in die-cast aluminum. We tried magnesium, which would have been better, but the mag has some corrosion problems that we didn't really want to live with. Mag also, if any of you have had some trouble, some experience with mag wheels, how touchy they are to a scratch or a nick somewhere. We were scared to death of mag in the blower. Any nicks or imperfections, and the things were going to crack. Aluminum didn't have that problem. So this was one thing that helped out the build quite a bit by getting the lesser rotational inertia. Maybe I should say there was a fourth problem. I think this too will probably come as news to you. We did have some problem with oil leaks.
How could that be?
Well, it could be this way, Christy. There were a bunch of problems. The worst one was that this, among other things, got tangled up with this chase after pony cars. And a couple of times that I said this before, I was on the verge of tears for the stuff that we were neglecting in order to chase this. And oil leaks, of course, was one of them. It was after that calmed down, and finally our management said, well, I guess we can't make the thing run to V8s after all. That I finally got a guy assigned full-time to oil leaks. Maybe I should go back a bit. The worst oil leak we had was that damn pressure sensing thing in the right-hand side. They put the thing down there on the right-hand side where it went right into the oil gallery, and figuring this is the spot where it had to be. The closer you can get the sensor to the bearings, which is what you're trying to feed with the oil, the more useful, the more reliable this pressure switch is. Well, that pressure switch had a Mylar diaphragm in it with a rubber O-ring. You've heard of O-rings. And of course, in the temperature atmosphere that was down there below the exhaust manifold, this thing just wouldn't hold up. And I'd have fight after fight after fight with the electrical guys who controlled that switch. It wasn't an impossible problem to solve, but they just kept saying, well, it's all right everywhere else. If there's something wrong, it's with your engine, not with our switch. And we went round and round, I don't know how long, with that, extremely frustrating. And I finally said to hell with it and moved the switch up on top, where it's not as good a place to sense, say, the loss of oil pressure. But by God, it lived up there. It didn't blacken the whole right side of the rear end of the automobile.
You must vote for unsafe in the corvairforum.com contest. for Corvair of the Month for March 2013.
Yes. Please cast your vote for unsafe.
Vote for unsafe or else.